The lawyers stood at the edge of the ruined palmetto, their shoes sinking in the black turned to earth, and they stared at the ring of blackened stones. The hogs had rooted bare, and not one of them could say a word. A whole county's worth of certainty had come apart in that clearing, and Cora Whitfield stood among her hogs, with dirt to her elbows, and watched the men she had feared come undone, by the very ground they had called worthless. She did not gloat. She had learned better than that. She only crouched down, laid her palm flat against a stone, still cool from a fire 100 years dead, and let the silence do the talking. 3 springs earlier, they had laughed at her for buying the place at all. 3 springs earlier, there had been a courthouse step, in a small Carolina town, and a man in a stiff collar reading off parcels of land the county wanted rid of. Land where the taxes had gone unpaid so long, the county would sooner take a few dollars than keep waiting. Most of the crowd that morning wanted the good bottomland down by the river, the fields already cleared and level. When the man read out the last parcel, 45 acres up on the ridge, covered so thick with saw palmetto and scrub oak that no plow had ever bitten it, the crowd went quiet in a bored sort of way, and men looked at their boots. Nobody wanted 45 acres of palmetto. Palmetto meant roots like iron cables, woven 6 feet down through sand and clay. Palmetto meant a man could work a lifetime and clear an acre a year and die before he saw a crop. The back taxes owed on it came to $19.40. A young woman standing at the edge of the crowd raised her hand and said she would pay it, and the whole town turned to look. Cora Whitfield was 26 years old that morning, and she was alone, which, in that place and that year, was the same as saying she was a fool. Her husband had been 3 years dead of a fever that took him in a week, and it had taken with him the small rented cotton patch they had worked, for the land was never theirs, and the man who owned it had no more use for a widow than for a lame mule. She had spent those 3 years hiring herself out, washing and picking and mending, saving coins in a tobacco tin, until the tin held a little over $40, which was every earthly thing she owned. The men on the courthouse step tried, in their way, to be kind. One of them told her plain that a woman alone could not clear palmetto land, that stronger men than she had broken themselves against that ridge and walked away. Another said she would have done better to keep her money and rent a room in town. She listened to all of it with a stillness that they mistook for meekness. Then she counted $19.40 into the clerk's hand and signed her name to the deed, and the 45 acres of palmetto that nobody wanted became hers. She did not tell them why she had bought it, because she was not entirely sure she could have put it into words that they would have believed. She only knew what she had seen. On a spring afternoon a month before the sale, walking the county road that skirted the ridge, she had watched a wild razorback sow come out of that palmetto with her whole litter behind her, and every one of those wild hogs had been fat in early spring, when everything else in that country was lean and gaunt and picking through last year's leavings. She had stood at the fence line a long while, and she had thought, plainly and slowly, the way she thought about everything, that a thing does not grow fat on nothing. Whatever was in that palmetto, whatever those wild hogs were rooting up beneath those iron roots, was food, and food was worth more than cleared fields to a woman with no field and no man, and no name that anyone respected. So, she bought the food nobody could see, and she let them laugh. And she went to find herself some hogs. She had $11 left when the deed was signed, and she spent 9 of it on hogs, and this was the part that made the town laugh hardest of all. She did not buy fine breeding stock, for she could not have afforded a single-blooded animal. She bought 7 half-wild scrub hogs, lean and long-legged and mean, the kind of hog that could live on acorns and swamp roots and its own bad temper, the kind a proper farmer would have been ashamed to own. A man named Dawes, who dealt in cattle and considered himself a shrewd judge of everything, watched her drive those 7 scrub hogs up the ridge road and told the men on the store porch that the widow Whitfield had bought worthless land to raise worthless hogs and that the whole business would be over by winter. It was the kind of thing a town repeats until it becomes true in their mouths. But there was one man who did not laugh, and his name was Silas Okafor, an old man born across the ocean in a country he spoke of rarely, who had come to that ridge 40 years before Cora was born and had a hardscrabble farm on the far side of it. He came to her fence the second day, leaned on it, watched her hogs test the palmetto, and said, in his slow, deep, deliberate way, "That land is never poor, only misunderstood, and that the man who calls a thing worthless is only confessing what he himself cannot see." Then he told her to let the hogs run. So she let them run, and she watched, and watching was the work she was best at. 1. She built a rough pen of split rails near a seep of clean water, and each morning she opened it before the light was full and let the 7 hogs loose into the palmetto, and each evening she walked out and counted them back, 7, always 7, and shut the rails behind them. And in the days between, she followed them. She learned where they went and what they did, and it was Silas Okafor who taught her the name of what they were finding, for he came often to the fence and once walked the palmetto with her and pointed to the ground with his cane. The saw palmetto, he told her, was not the enemy that everyone believed. Beneath those iron roots, the ground was rich and undisturbed, never plowed, never burned bare, 100 years of leaf and root laid down deep, and the hogs, with their hard snouts, could reach what no plow could reach. They rooted up palmetto hearts, tender and white and swamp tubers, and the fat starchy roots of a dozen plants a farmer would have called weeds, and massed from the scrub oaks in the fall, more massed than any cleared field would ever drop. The very thickness that made the land worthless to a plow made it a larder for a hog. Cora Whitfield stood in the palmetto with the old man and understood, fully now, what she had gambled her $40 on. The land was not empty. It had only been closed, like a locked pantry, to everyone who had come with the wrong key. She banked her success low and quiet that first year, the way a person banks a coal under ash so it will not go out and will not be seen. Her 7 hogs became by the following spring 7 and a litter, and then 2 litters, and she chose which to keep and which to sell with the patience of a woman who has learned that hunger teaches you to think in years and not in days. She did not tell the town how well the hogs were doing. When she brought the first 2 fattened barrows down to the buyer that autumn, she said only that the land was hard and the hogs were living, and let the man believe what he liked, which was that she was barely scraping by. He paid her a fair enough price, and told his friends the widow was still up there wasting her life on that ridge, and Cora walked home with more money in the tobacco tin than she had started with, and she added it up by lamplight, the arithmetic of it, what she had spent and what she had made and what she needed for the winter. And for the first time in 3 years, the numbers ran the right way. She said nothing. She bought 2 more sows with the money and let the palmetto feed them. By the second full year, the thing could no longer be entirely hidden because a farm that feeds itself grows in a way that shows. Her herd had climbed past 30 head, all of them fat on ground that cost her nothing to feed, and she had money enough now to hire a boy from town to help her. A thin, quick, half-orphaned boy of about 13 named Tom Pruitt, whose father drank and whose mother took in washing, and who wanted more than anything Cora had ever seen a child want. A place where the work meant something. She paid him honestly, and fed him well, and taught him what Silas had taught her, to watch the hogs and read the ground, and the boy took to it like a duck to a pond. It was Tom who kept the count, now morning and evening, and Tom who first came running to her one gray afternoon in the 3rd spring with his eyes wide, saying the hogs had torn open a new patch of ground near the center of the ridge, a low place ringed with old oaks, and that they had rooted up something strange, something that was not root and not tuber, something hard and square and made by hands. Cora went out to the place with the boy trotting ahead of her. The hogs had been at a low rise of ground beneath the biggest of the old oaks, and they had done in a single day what no man with a shovel would have thought to attempt, rooting the palmetto up by its iron roots and turning the black earth over in great clods, hunting some deep, sweet thing they could smell. And there in the churned ground, laid bare to the sky for the first time in longer than anyone living could remember, was a ring of blackened stones. They were field stones, fitted close, scorched dark on their inner faces, and within the ring lay a bed of old ash gone to gray powder, and half sunk in it the rusted iron mouth of a cooking pot and the stub of an andiron. It was a hearth. It was the hearth of a house that had stood on that ridge, and burned, or fallen, and rotted away so long ago that the palmetto had swallowed the very memory of it, and the palmetto had kept it sealed and hidden the way it had kept everything else. Cora Whitfield knelt in the dirt and laid her hand on the cool stones, and she felt the whole shape of a life she had never known, and she wondered, quietly, who had cooked at that fire and why they had gone. She did not have to wonder long, because the county came to tell her it began with Mr. Safety, Dawes, the cattle dealer, who had watched her herd grow and had watched the town's laughter curdle slowly into something else, into the particular sourness of men who mocked a thing and were proven wrong. Dawes came up the ridge road in a good buggy, with another man beside him, a soft, smiling man from the land office in the county seat named Chesley Grimes, and the two of them looked at the fat hogs and the tidy pens, and the widow standing straight in her work-worn dress, and Chesley Grimes smiled his soft smile, and said that he had come with unfortunate news. There was, he said, a question about her title. It seemed the old deed of record for that ridge, from before the tax sale, had never been properly cleared, and there were heirs or the possibility of heirs of the family that had once lived there, and until the matter was settled the county could not in good conscience recognize her claim, and it might be simplest, he said, still smiling, if she were to sell the parcel back to the county for a fair sum and spare herself the trouble and the lawyers. The sum he named was $40. She had paid $19.40 for it, and made it worth 100 times that, and he offered her $40 and called it a kindness. Cora Whitfield had learned, in 3 years of watching, to hear what men did not say. She heard now the thing beneath the soft words, which was that Chesley Grimes had known the land was rich, or had come to know it, and that the buried title was a lever and not a fact, a thing dug up to pry her loose. She said she would think on it. That evening she walked to Silas Okafor's farm and told the old man everything, and Silas sat a long time with his hands folded on his cane. Then he told her a thing she had not known. He told her that he remembered the family that had lived on that ridge, or remembered the story of them, for it was before even his time, a family named Aldous, who had built a house up there and cleared a little ground and then died in a hard winter fever, the whole household of them, and been buried by the county and forgotten, and that if there were living heirs at all, they were far scattered and long gone and had never once, in 40 years, come to claim so much as a stone. The title Grimes waved at her, Silas said, was a ghost, and a ghost frightens only those who do not know it is dead. And Cora, sitting in the old man's cabin, with the lamp between them, understood at last what the hearth was worth. It was not worth money, it was worth the truth. For the county records might have lost the shape of the old Aldous claim, but the ground had kept it, the way the palmetto had kept everything, and beneath the churned earth around that hearth, the hogs had turned up more than stone. There were the old foundation lines, the sill stones of a house, and near them, when Cora and Tom dug carefully in the following days, a broken slate with a name still scratched into it, and a row of small graves marked by fieldstones at the head. The graves of the Aldous family, laid out plain for anyone with eyes to read. The land itself was the deed. It told, in stone and ash and bone, exactly who had lived and died there, and that no living hand had held it since, and it gave the lie to any smiling man who claimed a hidden heir was waiting in the wings. Cora had bought a locked pantry, and inside it she had found not only food, but the very proof of her own right to stand there. Chesley Grimes did not come alone the next time. He came with 2 lawyers in stiff collars and Mr. Setter, Dawes trailing behind, and papers in a leather case, expecting, as such men expect, that a widow, shown enough legal words, would fold. But Cora Whitfield had spent 3 weeks preparing, and she had done it in the way she did everything, quietly and thoroughly, and she was not alone this time either, for Silas Okafor stood beside her with 2 other old men of the ridge, who remembered the Aldous story, and Tom Pruitt stood at her other side, and behind them, drawn up the ridge road by word that the widow was to be run off her land, was a good part of the town. They had come, some of them, half hoping to see her fall. But when they saw the hearth and the graves, and heard the old men name the family and the year, and when Cora, in a voice that did not shake, laid it out plain that the land had held no living claim for 2 generations, that she had bought it lawful and paid the county's own price for it, and worked it 3 years in the open sight of them all, and asked how it was that Mr. Grimes had known there might be heirs when the county's own records had lost them, and how he had known, before ever setting foot on the ridge, that the parcel was worth a great deal more than $40. The soft smile went off Chesley Grimes' face and did not come back. He had known, of course. He had meant to have the land for himself once the widow was gone, or to sell it to Dawes, and the buried title had been his lever, and now the ground had betrayed him by keeping the truth he had counted on it losing. He gathered his papers so quickly that a few of them slipped and scattered across the turned earth like startled birds, and Tom Pruitt picked them up and handed them back, with a face too polite to be anything but a rebuke, and Chesley Grimes got into his buggy and left the ridge, and the county heard no more of hidden heirs. Now, here is the part that mattered most, and it is the part the town remembered longest, longer than the laughing and longer than the lawyers. That same summer, the rains failed. Not a little, but wholly and cruelly, the way drought comes to that country once in a generation, and the good river bottom land that the town had prized on the courthouse steps 3 springs before, the level cleared fields that everyone had wanted instead of Cora's worthless palmetto, cracked open in the heat and turned to dust and grew nothing. The corn burned brown in July. The men who had bought bottom land watched their crops die, and watched their hogs and cattle go gaunt for want of feed, for the pastures were baked to stubble, and there was no corn to fatten anything. And by August there was real hunger creeping into that town, the kind that puts fear behind a proud man's eyes. But up on the ridge, beneath the iron roots of the saw palmetto, in the deep undisturbed ground that no drought could reach because no plow had ever opened it to the sun, the hogs of Cora Whitfield went on rooting up hearts and tubers and roots, and they stayed fat while the whole valley went lean. The very thickness that had made the land worthless was the thing that saved it. Hunger changes a town, and it changed this one, for it is easier to believe a thing is rotten than to admit you were wrong to mock it, but a growling belly will teach a man humility that pride never could. They came to her, then, Mr. Cond. Dawes came first, hat literally in his hands, and asked would she sell him hogs to feed his family and his few remaining stock, and behind him came the men from the store porch who had laughed loudest, and behind them the quieter ones, who had only pitied her, all of them come up the ridge road to the widow's worthless land to ask for food. And here was the moment, the true test of the whole 3 years, the choice that meant more than the deed, or the hearth, or the lawyers, for Cora Whitfield could have named any price she liked. She held the only full larder in a starving country, and there is not a merchant alive who would have blamed her for making a fortune off their hunger, off the very men who had wished her gone. She stood a long moment in front of them, and she thought of the tobacco tin, and the years of washing, and the man on the courthouse step who had told her she would have done better to sleep in the street. And then she named a fair price, a plain and honest price, no higher than what the hogs would have fetched in a good year. And to the poorest of them, to the families with children and nothing to trade, she gave the meat outright, and would take nothing for it at all. She did more than that. With Silas at her side, she showed them the thing itself, that the ridge was not a curse, but a pantry, and she taught the men who would listen how to run hogs on their own scrub and palmetto, that they had always cursed and burned, how to read the ground the way she had learned to read it, so that the next drought, whenever it came, would find them ready. She turned her one full larder into the town's beginning of one. And the town that had laughed at the widow Whitfield stopped laughing for good, and began, in the slow, grudging way of proud people, to speak her name with respect, and then with something warmer than respect. Tom Pruitt grew up on that ridge and never left it, and in time, she made him a partner in the place, for he had earned it. Silas Okafor lived long enough to see the palmetto he had defended become the most envied ground in the county, and before he died, he stood one evening at Cora's fence in the low gold light and said again the thing he had said the second day. That land is never poor, only misunderstood, and that she had proven it truer than he had ever managed to in 40 years. And so the woman who had bought 45 acres nobody wanted, for $19.40, with 7 mean scrub hogs and a stillness the town mistook for weakness, ended her days secure on the ridge, feared by no one and honored by all, with a herd too large to count in a morning and an old stone hearth cleared and kept at the center of her land. She built no house on it. She left the hearth as the hogs had found it, ringed with field stones and open to the sky, and she tended the small graves of the Aldous family beside it. And sometimes in the evening she would walk out there and lay her palm on the cool stones and think of the strangers who had cooked at that fire, and how the palmetto had kept them safe and hidden all those years, until the day the ground was ready to give up its secrets to someone patient enough to earn them. For that, in the end, was the whole of it. The lesson she carried and passed on and lived by until the last, that a thing is worth not what the crowd will pay for it on a courthouse step, but what it can do when the drought comes, and the proud grow hungry, and someone, at last, has learned to see.